They rolled their eyes when a 63-year-old veteran asked to run the SEAL qualification course. By the end of the day, the only sound left in that building was the echo of his last shot and the silence of every mouth that had mocked him. The smell of gun oil and rubber mats hit Jerome Winslow the second he stepped into the Pine Ridge Tactical Center just outside Abilene, Texas. It was a dry Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the sky looks washed out and the heat bakes everything into stillness. He took a few slow steps forward, letting the heavy door close behind him. He looked like someone who didn't belong, not because of his posture, it was still upright, even at 63, and not because he didn't know what he was doing. He carried himself with quiet confidence. It was the way people looked at him that made it obvious, or more precisely, the way they didn't. He wore a faded army jacket, the name patched threadbare, a pair of old tan boots with the sole slightly worn, his hands strong but age bore the scars of a man who'd used them for real work. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't loud. At the front desk, a tall man with a sharp jaw and silver crew cut glanced up from his clipboard. Retired Marine Colonel Richard Halverson had been running this place for the past 6 years. His presence was unmistakable, rigid, critical, and unapologetically blunt. Halverson's squinted lips barely moving as he studied Jerome for a half-second. "Alon, you lost?" he asked without smiling. Jerome stopped in front of the counter. "No sir, I'd like to rent a lane." Halverson glanced at the clipboard again. "Rental lanes require certification," he said. "We don't just hand out rifles to tourists." The last word hung in the air like cigarette smoke. The pause afterward wasn't long, but it felt thick. A younger man near the vending machine shifted uncomfortably. One of the range clerks cleared her throat. Jerome kept his voice low. "I'm certified, served 28 years Army." Halverson raised an eyebrow, didn't offer a greeting or a thank you. Instead, he reached under the counter and slid a clipboard across. "Sign the waiver, you can have lane 6. Jerome nodded once and took the pen. Near the corner of the room, two younger guys sat cleaning their handguns at the prep bench. One of them, Trey Loman, late 20s, lanky, a bit cocky, nudged his buddy. "What's that guy doing here?" he whispered. The friend shrugged. "Beats me, probably retired back in the 90s. Trey chuckled under his breath. "Yep, before half the gear we use even existed." Jerome heard it. He didn't respond. He simply finished signing and handed the clipboard back. Halverson didn't make eye contact. "Standard dem for okay. That'll do," Jerome replied. "Target SEAL quail if you've got it." That made Halverson look up. He stared at Jerome for a moment, then smirked like someone watching a dog try to do math. "You sure?" Jerome met his eyes calm as still water. "Yeah." Halverson nodded slowly, as if playing along. "All right sir, lane 6. Don't say I didn't warn you." Jerome took the rifle, his lane cart, and walked past. A few glances and muffled side comments. He didn't speed up, didn't slow down. Neither. He'd been in louder rooms, harsher ones that reeked of diesel, blood, and burnt sand. This place, it was just nose and taper. He stepped onto the range, paused at the threshold, and took a breath. But behind him, Halverson was already chuckling to one of the clerks. "Let's see if Grandpa can even load the damn thing." Lane 6 was second from the end. Good view of the targets, but just enough distance from the crowd to keep to yourself. Jerome set the M4 gently on the bench like it was something sacred, not rented. He unzipped his soft case and pulled out his own pair of earmuffs, more smooth where the leather padding had rubbed away. Then slowly, methodically, he checked the rifle's chamber behind the glass. The range staff watched. They weren't doing it intentionally, not all of them, but eyes drifted, whispers rolled. Trey Loman leaned on the observation rail, chewing the inside of his cheek. "You ever seen someone that old run the SEAL qual?" he asked the guy beside him. "Nah," his friend said, keeping his voice low. "I mean, maybe once, but that was a retired instructor, not some walk-in off the street. Guy looks like he should be playing checkers in a park." Trey muttered back on the line. Jerome finished setting up. His fingers moved with a quiet rhythm, loading rounds into magazines with a precision born of years, not just muscle memory. He placed 3 loaded mags in a neat row, adjusted the sling, and pulled the charging handle back in one clean motion. In the adjacent lane, a woman in a sheriff's department polo glanced his way. She had seen that kind of posture before on people who didn't need to show off. She kept watching. Jerome hadn't come to make news. He hadn't come to prove anything, but something had cracked open. The moment he heard Halverson's voice at the desk, the smugness, the dismissal. He'd tasted it before over decades, from instructors who thought they knew better, from officers who never saw combat but carried more medals, from strangers who assumed he couldn't do what they could. But Jerome didn't come to remember them. He came to remember himself. He loaded the first mag, clicked it, and took a breath, and waited at the monitor station when the center's assistant range manager looked over the setup. "Lane 6 wants SEAL qual," she said, raising an eyebrow. "You authorize that?" Halverson gave a short nod. "Let him run it. He'll tap out halfway through." "Should we pull his data?" she asked. "No, let it Upload to the leaderboard, give the young guns a laugh. Out on the line, the signal buzzed. Jerome exhaled, brought the M4 to his shoulder and moved the first target. A 50-yard silhouette snapped backward to shots clean. Less than 2 seconds. Trey's eyebrows lifted. Okay, maybe that was lucky. The next target popped up, moving left to right across a narrow window. Jerome tracked it with barely any wasted motion. Tap tap, it fell. Wait a minute, Gwen muttered, watching the screen. Jerome didn't pause. Each round felt like it came from somewhere older than the room. Not just muscle, not just memory, but a place that had once depended on precision the way a man depends on breath. 3 targets in under 6 seconds. A flick to the far left, hit shift right, hit reload. He didn't miss. The crowd near the glass started getting thicker. Even the range instructors were walking in. Trey now silent stare at the data feed. That seal phase 2 timing, he mumbled. No way. Halverson leaned in, arms crossed, eyes narrowing at the screen. He didn't say a word, but his jaw clenched. Gwen's voice broke the quiet. Sir, he's on pace to clear the full circuit under seal tier 1. Halverson didn't reply. Inside lane 6, Jerome moved like the air around him was thinner, like he was somewhere else entirely, somewhere hotter, somewhere with the hum of choppers in the distance and sand in every fold of his gear. This wasn't about showing off, it was about remembering who he was before the world forgot. But just as the final target flicked up and Jerome raised his sights again, a deep voice from behind the glass broke the stillness. Who the hell is this guy? Colonel Richard Halverson stood behind the glass like a statue, rigid, arms crossed, shoulders squared, face unmoved. But inside his pry itched badly. He hadn't even wanted this job when it was first offered. Running a tactical center was supposed to be his retirement gig, easy days, steady pay, and a chance to keep civilians in check. But the problem with power, especially leftover power from a long military career, is that it doesn't fade quietly, it festers. And Halverson wasn't the kind of man who took kindly to being surprised, especially not by a man like Jerome. Behind him, Gwen tapped at the screen on the wall-mounted monitor. Colonel, he just ran the first sequence in under 30 seconds. That's 3 seconds faster than anyone on the leaderboard. Halverson didn't move. He's just tasting himself early. He'll fade. He's through 9 targets without a miss. Silence. Gwen glanced over. She was mid-40s, had a degree in criminal justice, and had run the back end of the center longer than Halverson had been managing it. She didn't say it out loud, but the tone in her voice said it for her. You misjudged him. She tried again. You don't recognize the name Jerome Winslow? Halverson shook his head. Should I remember that name from some old training logs? Marksmanship instructor, Fort Huachuca, worked with special operations guy, trained half of CENTCOM's recon teams in the late 90s. Halverson's jaw shifted ever so slightly. It was decades ago, still shooting like it was yesterday. Halverson finally moved. He walked toward the glass and leaned in, peering at Jerome through the small gap between the panels. The older man was reloading, smooth, no wasted motion, that same damn calm in every movement. He came in here like a janitor. Halverson muttered, didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Gwen replied. There was a pause. You think he came here to prove something? Halverson asked. No, she said plainly. I think he came here to remember. Back on the range, Jerome cycled into the kneeling sequence. His knees dropped with precision, back straight, muzzle steady. Shots landed one after another, each hitting center mass. The tablet that tracked his rounds lit up in real time, red to green, all green. A few of the younger regulars were not quiet. Trey stepped back from the glass, eyes at his friend. Garrett scratched his head. Dude's unreal. No way, he's not military, Trey said. I mean recently. Gwen turned toward them. Army, retired, highly trained, more than you think. Trey opened his mouth, thought better of it, and just nodded. Inside lane 6, Jerome hit his final reload. The overhead counter beeped. Last sequence, 3-second interval targets. That meant 1 shot per target under pressure with minimal margin for error. He didn't flinch, he didn't adjust, he just moved. Bang, bang, dang. Each target drop. Even Halverson, arms still crossed, had to admit it. Whoever this man was, he wasn't here playing. He stepped back from the glass and muttered under his breath, we'll see how he handles the speed run. Gwen wasn't looking at the colonel anymore. She was watching the monitor. Sir, he's already there. What? He's already running the speed round. Back on the floor, Jerome swept through the final 6-shot drill, a challenge that had broken younger men, the kind of drill that punished hesitation, doubt, or anything less than total focus. He completed it in just over 5 seconds. Target flashes, green, 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 green. Gwen's mouth parted slightly. Sir, he just tied the top SEAL's score with 3 phases left. Colonel Halverson stared. That leaderboard's not accurate. It was never recalibrated after the last software update. Gwen gave him a look. You told me last week it was dead on. Halverson didn't respond. Jerome meanwhile stepped back from the line and took a breath, not winded, not sweating, just focused. He looked like someone who had seen harder days. But just as Gwen reached for the intercom to alert the floor team, something clicked in Halverson's head, and it wasn't curiosity anymore. It was the sudden memory of a name he'd read in a dusty field report 2 decades ago. Jerome stepped out of the firing lane and into the gear-up room where Shooters adjusted vests, swapped barrels, and ran silent drills with dummy rounds. It was cooler here, quieter. The muffled reports of distant gunfire leaked in from behind the blast-proof door, but inside the tension was of a different kind. Less nose, more watchful eyes. He laid the M4 gently on the table in front of him and began breaking it down. Bolt carrier out, dust cover, snapshot, everything deliberate. There was no rush, there never had been. Across the room a man sat watching, stocky with a buzz cut and a deep scar running from his chin to the edge of his jaw. He was in his early 50s, wearing a black shirt with a Texas Rangers badge embroidered on the chest. Sean Delgado. Delgado narrowed his eyes as he watched Jerome clean the rifle like it was second nature, not flashy, not textbook, just smooth. He rubbed the side of his face, then stood. You mind if I ask where you learned to shoot like that? Delgado said, stepping over. Jerome didn't look up. He was busy scrubbing the bolt with a rag. Nowhere special, he answered. Delgado gave a short laugh. That's not true. I've seen nowhere special, and it doesn't look like that was surgical. Man, Jerome gave a small shrug. Long time ago. Delgado sat on the bench across from him. What was it? Rangers recon. Jerome finally looked up. Eyes steady. Army marksmanship instructor. I trained recon teams at Fort Huachuca for a while. Delgado leaned back slightly. You're Winslow. Jerome tilted his head, not surprised but not eager either. Yeah. Delgado let out a slow breath. I thought that name rang a bell. You trained my unit back in '98, before Kosovo. I was a disaster until your course. Still quote your line about breathe through the fear. Jerome chuckled softly. Didn't think anyone remembered that. I remember. Delgado said. Change the way I shoot, maybe the way I think. They sat in silence for a moment. Delgado leaned in. That colonel out there, Halverson, you knew he was watching, right? I saw his reflection in the glass. Jerome said. Didn't matter. Delgado cracked a smile. He's been running this place like a private boot camp since he retired. Doesn't think anyone outside the Corps has anything worth teaching. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Everyone thinks they've seen the hardest thing until they haven't. Delgado replied. Jerome nodded slowly and went back to wiping down the rifle. I'm not here to impress anyone. I'm here because I hadn't touched an M4 in a few years. Wanted to feel the weight again. Delgado studied him. You didn't come here for recognition. Jerome looked up again. Nope, just muscle and memory. Just then the locker room door opened and Trey Loman walked in holding his phone like it had answers. He stopped short when he saw Jerome and Delgado, then walked over with hesitant curiosity. Hey, Trey said, awkward, almost boyish. Now I didn't mean anything earlier. I was just talking. Jerome said nothing. Trey cleared his throat. It's just when you walked in, I didn't think you didn't think I could shoot. Jerome finished for him, calm, not angry, just stating fact. Trey lowered his gaze. Yeah. Delgado raised an eyebrow. It stayed quiet watching. Jerome leaned back slightly. You ever lose someone under 6 because your shot was half a second late? Trey shook his head. You ever pull a man out of a sand pit with your belt while enemy rounds come from 3 sides? Trey shook his head again. You ever sit in the dark for 12 hours holding your breath because one sound would get your team killed? No sir. Then you don't know what skill looks like. Not really. Trey swallowed. No sir. Jerome's tone softened. But you could if you respect the craft. If you stop thinking skill comes with age or skin or swagger. Respect earns skill, skill earns respect. That's how it works. Trey nodded once quietly. Jerome picked up the now clean bolt carrier group and slid it into place. But before Trey could speak again, the PA system buzzed. Shooter Winslow to the front desk. Colonel Halverson would like a word. Jerome didn't react to the announcement. He simply reassembled EM4, snapped the dust cover shut, and placed the rifle neatly on the bench. His fingers moved without hesitation. But there was something different in the way he stood up, measured like a man deciding whether it was worth entertaining a conversation he'd rather avoid. Delgado stood. Do you want me to come with? Jerome gave a slight shake of the head. I've talked to men like him before. As he stepped out into the hallway, Trey followed a few paces behind, quiet this time, as if just watching Jerome might teach him something. The corridor smelled faintly of rubber mats and cleaning oil. The end of it. Halverson stood near the front counter, arms folded behind his back in that familiar officer stance, like he was still on a base somewhere holding a clipboard and a grudge. Jerome approached calmly. Mr. Winslow, Halverson said. Was flat. Got a minute? Jerome nodded once. Sure. The range had quieted. A few people lingered near the rental wall pretending to browse. Others watched from the seating area, eyes flicking between Halverson and Jerome like they were waiting for something to go wrong. Halverson spoke low. Your former Army Fort Huachuca trained recon units. Jerome stayed still. That's right. Thought I recognized your name. Took me a minute. You were attached to JSOC support in Iraq Desert Storm. To Jerome nodded again. Halverson rubbed his chin. Impressive record, but you've been out a long time. Didn't realize I needed to be current to rent a lane. Jerome replied evenly. Halverson gave a short forced laugh. You don't nod if you can shoot like that. There was a silence. Halverson shifted his weight We don't usually let civilians run the SEAL cool without background checks. You ran mine. You handed me the rifle. Another pause. Halverson exhaled slowly through his nose, looking around like he needed to recalibrate his words. You're good, that much is clear. Probably the best I've seen come through here, and I've seen a lot. Jerome stayed quiet, watching him. Halverson cleared his throat. I'd like to offer you something. Jerome raised an eyebrow. Position: instructor status, part-time. If you want, we're building out a veteran-led core structure code. Use someone with your background. Jerome tilted his head, slightly amused. You offering me a job, Colonel? Halverson straightened. I am. Jerome let the silence stretch. The door buzzed again. Someone else entering the lobby. Nobody. Turned. The tension now wasn't loud, it was all imposture. Appreciate the offer, Jerome said finally, but I didn't come here for work. Halverson nodded slowly. Still, if you change your mind, I came to shoot, Jerome said, cutting him off. Without sharpness not to be measured. Halverson said nothing. Jerome turned and walked back toward the range. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. Everyone had already heard what mattered, but Halverson, even now, couldn't leave it alone. You could do a lot of good here. Winslow, teach these kids discipline. Jerome didn't stop walking. Discipline's not something you teach at a desk. As he disappeared down the corridor, Gwen emerged from the office nearby and tasked Halverson, giving him a sideways glance. Told you he wasn't just some walk-in. Halverson rubbed the back of his neck. I was wrong. Back on the range, Jerome returned to lane 6. The monitor still had his score frozen on the screen. Highest recorded in the center's history. No one dared clear it. He adjusted the ear protection, checked the M4 once more, and loaded a new mag behind him. Trey walked over slowly. Mine. If I watch a little more. Jerome didn't look back. Sure, just stay quiet. Trey stood behind the glass like a kid at a museum exhibit, watching every movement. The second round began. Jerome dropped into a smooth rhythm. Reloads tighter, timing sharper, no hesitation. It wasn't a man pushing to show off, it was muscle memory taking command. But just as the final shot of the round landed center target, a low voice near the back of the observation area muttered, he's not just shooting, he's sending a message. By the time Jerome began the final sequence of drills, the observation area behind lane 6 looked more like a pack seminar than a shooting range. Even those who had come to train were standing aside, watching through the reinforced glass, as if something rare was happening, something they didn't want to blink and miss. The leaderboard mounted on the wall flickered every time a new score came in. Name after name roll by Logan S. Bennett or Ortiz D. all pushed further down the rankings. At the top, a new one blinked in Jay Winslow, 97.8% total accuracy, 0.42.221. A young staffer leaned closer to the terminal. He just passed Bennett on the multi-target drill. Another murmured he beat Ortiz by 5 seconds on precision. 5 seconds. Gwen stood with arms folded, watching the stats appear in real time. She didn't say a word, but her face told it all. Respect, plain and honest. Inside the lane, Jerome never once looked at the numbers. He didn't care. He worked through the drill like he was moving underwater. Focus, smooth, intentional. His stance, his reload timing, the way he adjusted for distance without overcompensating, it was all there, like muscle and metal. Had agreed long ago to trust one another. From the side while Halverson watched, he hadn't gone back to his office. His pride wasn't the only thing that kept him standing there now. He's not even winded, Gwen said beside him. Halverson nodded, his voice low. He's pacing himself. That's even harder. Did you ever train with guys like that? She asked once. He said, in Kandahar, guy like that doesn't talk much, doesn't need to. Back inside the booth, Jerome shifted his weight slightly and transitioned to the left side firing stance. A challenge drill, offhand 6 shots, short window. He raised the M for bang, bang, bang. All hits. The sensor screen lit up green on every target. The terminal beeped. Another name dropped off the top 5. Jerome was now ranked no. 1 across for categories: movement, drill, reload, speed, close quarters, group accuracy, and reaction time. Gwen leaned in. That last one, that was the record held by a 26-year-old out of Camp Pendleton. He's 63. Halverson muttered, how the hell he's not proving anything. Gwen said quietly, he's remembering. Jerome reloaded and turned back toward the final series. Dynamic movement fire. It required pivoting between different angles, simulating hallway turns and door entries. Most shooters had trouble even clearing the drill, let alone scoring high. He ran it clean, no wasted motion, no missed targets. The system processed it. Jay Winslow, dynamic movement fire, 100% accuracy, 01793. Ed silence in the room. Halverson looked around. Young instructors who once mocked walk-ins were now slack-jawed. Trey was still behind the glass, frozen, as if clapping would ruin it. Even Delgado, watching from the rear of the observation area, exhaled like he'd been holding his breath the whole time. Jerome clicked the safety on, slung the rifle back over his shoulder, and walked off the line. The monitor blinked one last time. Jay Winslow, all-time high score, Pine Ridge Tactical Center. No music, no speech, just a faint buzz from the ventilation unit overhead, and the quiet steps of a man putting a weapon back into its case. He walked back through the prep room. The murmurs followed him, but he ignored Dem no swagger, no arrogance, just steady hands and a straight back as he packed up. Trey stepped forward. Sir, that was the cleanest run I'd ever seen. Ever. Jerome gave a slight smile. Appreciate that. I thought. Trey stopped himself. No, I assumed you weren't. You know I know what you assumed, Jerome said. I'm sorry. Jerome nodded. Just remember, assumptions are shortcut that never gets you to the right place. Trey nodded, eyes fixed on the floor. You shoot, Jerome asked. I try not like that. Jerome looked him over. Come back tomorrow. I'll give you 2 drills that'll change your grip forever. Trey blinked. Really? You listen, I'll show you. Rush. I walk. But before Trey could answer, Gwen stepped out from behind the desk, walking toward Jerome with something in her hand, a certificate freshly printed with a seal at the bottom. Top score, advanced qualification. Jerome stared at the certificate for a second, not reaching for it. His eyes rested on the bold print. Top score, advanced qualification. It was meant to feel like a trophy, a badge of honor, but for him it brought something else. The sharp smell of burned powder faded, replaced by a thick wave of diesel sweat and heat. The lights of the indoor range dimmed into a memory of orange sky somewhere far off. A generator hum in the distance, the pop of gunfire blended with shouts in a language he never learned to speak, but had come to understand all too well. It was Iraq, near Busra spring of '91. Young Jerome crouched behind a Humvee, sand biting at his face. The convoy had taken fire an hour earlier. 3 men down, his squad leader pinned behind a half-top armored truck with no radio contact, and all they had between them and getting picked off was Jerome, with a borrowed scope and 7 loaded mags. He remembered his hands, how still they were. Not trained. There's a difference. Lieutenant Banner had whispered through gritted teeth. If you don't make those shots, we're not getting out of here. Jerome didn't blink. He'd never been in real combat until that day. Training couldn't replicate the weight of it. That knows the randomness, the blood in your mouth from biting your own cheek just to keep quiet. He'd taken 6 shots, hit 5, not sent a mass center of the neck. The kind of precision you don't explain, the kind you only learn from knowing every inch of your weapon like a part of your own body. After the 4th shot, the enemy fires slow. After the 5th, it stopped. By the time support arrived, Jerome was standing, gun slung, hands black with grease and sweat. Banner looked at him with wide eyes. Where the hell did you learn that? Jerome had only answered Huachuca. Later, back at base, someone handed him a commendation, a piece of paper with his name and some rank acknowledgement. He remembered holding it. He remembered feeling nothing because the men they couldn't save, their names weren't on any certificate. Back in the present, Jerome blinked. The sound of the indoor range returned, the soft clatter of brass underfoot, the murmur of voices. Gwen still stood there holding the certificate. Jerome finally took it with a respectful nod. Thank you, you earned it, she said. He tucked it carefully into his bag without looking at it again. Across the room, Halverson hadn't moved, but his expression had. It wasn't embarrassment anymore, it wasn't pride either, it was something closer to understanding. He walked over, keeping his voice quiet. That flashback just now, you were somewhere else. Jerome didn't confirm it, but Halverson didn't need him to. I've had them to, he said. Jerome nodded slowly. They don't go away, no, Halverson said. They just stop asking permission. There was a long pause between them, not heavy, just truthful. I got 3 guys out that day, Jerome said softly, but not all of them. Never stopped thinking about the ones I couldn't. Halverson looked down at the rifle case Jerome carried. And this helped some days, Jerome said. Not all. They stood there in silence for a few more seconds. 2 old soldiers whose wars didn't tend with their turf. Finally, Halverson said, do you ever think about teaching again? Jerome looked at him, not harshly, just tired. I teach when someone's willing to learn, and if they're not, then I keep my mouth shut and shoot. Trey had stepped a little closer, hanging back but listening. Jerome caught him in the corner of his eye. He wants to learn. I'll give him one lesson, maybe. To Halverson gave a small real nod. Good. Jerome turned back toward his bag and zipped it closed, but before he could walk away, Delgado's voice rose from the far corner of the range. Winslow, you got 5 more watching from the upstairs window. You may want to stay a minute longer. Jerome turned his head slowly toward the upstairs window. Behind the one-way glass, 5 men stood pressed against it. 3 instructors from the local police academy, 1 SWAT team coordinator from Odessa, and the last a retired Air Force captain who had stopped by for a weapons consultation. They hadn't come to gawk, they were watching with something else in their eyes, something between respect and curiosity, the kind of look reserved for those who do things most people only talk about. Jerome sighed, adjusted his rifle strap, and slung the bag over his shoulder. Don't let him keep you, Delgado said, stepping forward, but you should know those guys up there, they teach others how to shoot today. They just got taught themselves. Jerome gave a small nod, but didn't say anything. On the far wall, the digital leaderboard refreshed again. Top scores: Pine Ridge Tactical Center, hello, 100% dynamic movement, fire 001793J, Winslow SEAL qualification course 97.8%, 04-221J Winslow close quarters. Precision 98.3%, 0015.67 Bennett, R 95.5%, over 0600 Rule Ortiz D 94.2%, over 91 to the list. Was now unmistakably dominated by one named Trey. Walked over to stare at the screen. That's insane, he muttered more to himself. And to anyone else, you wiped them out, like not just beat them, replace them. Jerome followed his gaze, and for the first time that day looked up at the board. He studied it for a long moment. Those names, he said, they're just numbers. Until they know why you shoot, until then they're meaningless. Trey turned. What do you mean? Jerome turned slightly so Trey could see him without the distraction of the screen behind them. Most of the guys on that board train for speed, for bragging rights, but you shoot for understanding, for control, for the man next to you. If you ever get that, then the board will matter. Trey stood still, absorbing it. From across the range, Halverson approached again, this time slower, measured, less of the old Marine in his step. I'll be honest, he began, when you walked in I didn't expect any of this. I judged you. Jerome glanced at him. Yeah, you did. Halverson didn't flinch. And I'll carry that one. I've been too long in this job without anyone checking me. You still got time, Jerome said. The ones who never change, those are the dangerous ones. Halverson looked toward the upstairs window. I've got instructors up there who think they've seen everything. This, he pointed toward lane 6. This just rewrote half our training assumptions. Gwen, who had returned to the desk, called out, Colonel, every shooter in the room just asked for Jerome's run to be saved on the center server. They want to study it. Halverson blinked, then glanced at Jerome. I'm serious about the offer. Winslow, instructor, pick your own schedule. Hell, rewrite the curriculum if you want. We need someone like you. Jerome didn't answer right away. He reached down, picked up his duffel, and slipped the strap across his chest. I'm not looking to punch a clock, he said. That part of my life's over. Trey stepped forward, trying not to interrupt. But if someone wanted to train with you, like really learn, would you show them? Jerome looked at him, then at Gwen, then finally back at Halverson. If someone shows up with the right questions and the right attitude, he said, I'll give them the time. But I'm not here to build a following. I'm here to pass something down. Gwen smiled. That might be more valuable than a full-time hire. Halverson nodded once, understood. Jerome turned and began walking toward the exit. Trey jogged a little to catch up. Hey, what time tomorrow? Jerome paused by the glass door. 10 sharp, he said. Don't be late. First drill's about respect. That one can't be taught, it has to be practiced. Trey grinned. Yes, sir. Jerome pushed the door open. The sun outside had begun to sink, throwing long shadows across the pavement. He stepped through them slowly, as if each stride still belonged to a younger man. But just before the door closed behind him, Gwen whispered to no one in particular, I think we just met the best shooter who ever walked through this place. And he didn't even want anyone to know. Jerome stood outside the range for a moment, just beyond the double doors, letting the dry Texas air meet his skin. He squinted toward the parking lot, where the late afternoon sun bounced off the windshields like mirrors. His truck, an old navy blue Silverado with chipped paint on the rear bumper, sat in the far corner under a sagging mesquite tree, the kind of truck no one would notice. He walked slowly toward it, not out of exhaustion, but the deliberate pace of a man who carried his time like a weight. He'd earned the right to move slowly with behind him. The door swung open again. Mr. Winslow. It was Halverson, no longer the stiff-backed colonel, just a man now holding a file folder and a water bottle, jogging a little to catch up. Jerome stopped by his driver's side door. Halverson caught up a little out of breath. I know you said no, but I wanted to give you this anyway. He handed him the folder. Inside, Jerome could already tell schedule layouts, a contract for a list of open classes, and a badge template with his name pre-filled. Jerome glanced at it, then looked up. You don't give up easy. I've been wrong about a lot of things, Halverson said, but I'm not wrong about this. You walk in there and every man's ego shrinks just enough to hear something new that's rare. Jerome shook his head with a quiet smile. I'm not trying to humble anyone. I know that, Halverson said. That's why it works. He took a breath and added, I built the range thinking I was passing on everything I knew, but watching you today, that wasn't shooting, that was discipline turned into motion. Jerome's eyes softened. Discipline's only real when nobody's watching. Halverson looked down, nodded slightly. Even more reason to let others see what it looks like when it is. Jerome exhaled. He thought about the younger men behind that glass, the way Trey had looked at him, not with envy, but hunger, not the kind that craved medals or clout, but the kind that wanted meaning, the same kind Jerome once had buried under 20 years of sand, silence, and command orders. I'm not putting on a uniform again, Jerome said. You wouldn't have to. I'm not clocking in or putting up with politics. You wouldn't have to. Jerome took another look inside the folder. On the back page was a note scribbled in Gwen's handwriting. If even one more person learns the way you shoot, this place gets better. Jerome closed the folder and handed it back. Keep it for now. Halverson furrowed his brow. For now. I'm not saying yes, but I'll be back next week, one day, just to see if anyone's serious about learning. Halverson extended his hand. That's all I can ask. Jerome shook it. For and brief. I'll bring Trey Halverson. Added, he's not just a punk kid, he's got the makings. We'll see. Jerome said, I'll put him on front-loaded mag drills. If he drops a single round, he restarts. Halverson laughed harsh. Precise, Jerome corrected. They stood for a second more before Halverson took the hint and turned back toward the building. Jerome opened the door of his truck and climbed, and before starting the engine he sat still, both hands on the wheel. His gaze drifted not toward the range, but toward something much further away. He wasn't seeing the gravel or the exit. He was back in a makeshift tent, lacing boots before dawn, loading gear onto a rusted Humvee, waiting on a command that never came in clean English. Back when everything felt heavier, he blinked, turned the key, and the engine came alive with a low rumble. But as he began to back out of the lot, he noticed one more figure standing at the edge of the sidewalk. Trey, holding a notebook, eyes locked on him like a student watching his only teacher disappear. Jerome pulled up to the edge of the lot and rolled down his window. The engine rumbled softly beneath him, but the rest of the world felt still. Trey stood there, notebook clutched to his chest, pen tucked behind one ear like a freshman trying not to blow his shot. His voice cracked a little when he spoke. Mr. Winslow, I wrote down what you said about discipline. I've been thinking about it since you left the line. Jerome looked at him. It's not something you memorize, Trey. You live it every rep, every choice, every time. You don't take the easy way out. Trey stepped closer, emboldened. I want to get better, not just at shooting, at everything. I didn't come to this place to impress anybody. I came because I thought if I got good with a weapon, I'd feel more in control, less small. Jerome leaned his arm against the edge of the door. You ever feel scared all the time? Trey admitted. Jerome gave a slow nod. Good means you know what you're dealing with. Trey frowned. So what do I do with that fear? Use it. Jerome said. That not in your chest, that's your mind telling you to slow down and listen. The ones who act like they're never scared, they're either lying or reckless. Sometimes both. Trey nodded, writing that down. Jerome glanced ahead. You remember what I said inside about respect? Yeah, then show up next week. Don't speak unless it's useful. Don't ask for shortcuts. Don't ask me for praise. Just work. I will. You'll hate the drills. I'll do 'em. Jerome gave a small smirk. Bring a towel. You'll need it. Trey grinned. Yes, sir. The older man shifted into drive, van started to pull away, then paused. He looked back through the window one last time. Trey, yeah, don't just learn to shoot, learn why you're holding the weapon in the first place, because the day the question finds you and you don't have an answer, that's the day someone else gets hurt. Trey's expression sobered. I understand. Jerome nodded once, then eased out of the lot and onto the main road. The sun was low now, skimming the horizon like it was trying to hide behind the hills. The road stretched long and dry ahead of him, empty except for a few tire marks and the distant hum of trucks heading west. He didn't look back. Inside the Pine Ridge Tactical Center, Gwen walked back to the counter and cleared the screen. The system locked Jerome's stats in a permanent file marked historical record. Halverson stood beside her. Think he'll come back? I don't think he ever left, she replied. Just needed a reason to step forward again. In the observation area, one of the academy instructors leaned toward another. We're rewriting our training next month. That guy's footage mandatory viewing. Back in the locker room, Delgado watched Trey copy something into his notebook. The younger man looked focused, not on himself, on the process. Delgado smiled faintly. He'll be all right. Some people walk into a room and command it. Others walk into a room and change it. Jerome Winslow never raised his voice, never asked for anything, never tried to be seen. He just showed the room who he was, and that was enough. Not because he needed to be great, but because he remembered how much damage can come from forgetting your purpose, and by doing that he left something behind, an example, a new kind of leaderboard. Not the one glowing on the wall, the one that matters, the one built from character. So if you're watching this, ask yourself, are you practicing for applause, or are you preparing for responsibility? There's a difference, and the ones who know it, you can hear it in every shot. If this story moved you, share it, and if you want more real stories about real people, hit that subscribe button and stay with us. The ones worth hearing aren't always the loudest, they're the ones who show up, speak less, and still change everything.